because of the gravity of the situation and what's going on, you don't even think about being tired. But I don't even recall being exhausted where I, was going to hang out in some place for 5 minutes or whatever. I must say that after 50 plus years, like Ed and I both remarked how many of the specifics we don't remember. It's really amazing. I do remember certain incidents and certain situations which are very specific, such as the one I described, crossing the Po, and there's a whole bunch of other ones, but a lot of it is sort of a blur.
Is it because there was just so much going on so quickly?
Well, it could have been, or it could be just time. I'm sure I remembered a lot more, the month after the war was over and we were on the boat coming home or whatever. Well, that was 3 or 4 months later. The war ended May 3 in Italy. May 2, I guess, or May 3. And we didn't get on the boat until August sometime. So it was 3 or 4 months. Ed remembers running in track meets over in Milan. He was a track guy. Still talks about that a lot. He said, "How did I get over there, Ray?" I said, "Ed, I think every place we went in the back of a truck."
Were you together with Ray the whole time?
With Ed?
I mean, with Ed Burda?
We went through training in Camp Hale. We kind of recognized that I came into Camp Hale in late June of '43. He came in maybe in October or November, I think he said. But we were together, not in the same squad, but in the same platoon, right through the war. And then when we got to the States, we were all broken up. That's one of the tragedies of, well, tragedy is too strong a word, but one of the disappointments is you've trained with these people forever and you went through all of this, rather traumatic experience, and suddenly you're dispersed. You never even have a chance to say goodbye or whatever, which is kind of sad. But we split apart, but we kept in touch over all the years, not as we were having families and careers, maybe 2, 3, 4 years would go by before we'd, contact one another again. It wasn't like we were in contact every week or every month. In the last few years, the last 10, 15 years, it's been 3 or 4 times a year. And then I visit them every so often. I'll be out there this fall. I'm headed to Japan. There's a favorite charity over there which I support, and a golf tournament that I play in. And I try to make it every other year. That's a whole other story, but I'm going to stop and see him on the way there.
That's nice that you kept up the contacts.
Yeah. I don't know if you know it or not, I lived in Japan for the company for about over 5 years in Tokyo, and started our Japanese subsidiary over there.
Oh, so you still have strong roots there.
Yeah.
You do get around.
No.
Well, how about if you just really quickly just rephrase what you said about there's no atheists. Tell me a little bit about that now that the tapes are on.
Oh, well, I don't know if I read that phrase somewhere or whether I created it. I really don't. But I do know that it's true. And it's an expression that says, when you're in combat, boy, all of those preliminary ideas you have about an afterlife or religion or whatever, or if you viewed yourself as somewhat of a, not an atheist, but someone who just, when you get into combat, one of the things that pulls you through is prayer, and not while you're fighting or anything, but at certain moments in the foxhole and so on, when the artillery is coming in. And no one knows unless you're there. They can't capture it on film, the sound of 88 artillery shells coming in, and the speed and the power and the noise. One of the things that struck me about war was the total sort of disorganization and noise. It's like even the generals, they can't control what's happening on the ground. And one of the things that is so true, and I told all the students at this speech I gave at high school, is that one of the things you had to do is you had to keep moving forward. You just couldn't let yourself get pinned down, and then they'd just chew you up with mortars and artillery and whatever. But anyway, when you're in you're talking about there's no atheists in foxhole, that's a sort of a general, generic expression. There's no atheists in war, so to speak. And and all soldiers, when you dig deep enough, with very few exceptions, will tell you that religion helped pull you through. Prayer helped pull you through. And it didn't matter what religion, obviously. It was just religion. You believed in something. So that's why I came up with that. So it was kind of embodied. I'm sure I wasn't that creative. I must have read it somewhere.
Well, I take it you weren't an atheist then.
Pardon?
I take it you weren't an atheist.
No. I was brought up in parochial schools. I was an altar boy. I'm not very church-going now, but I still am very, I'll use the term religious.
Do you think that's what pretty much got you through the most difficult times?
I think that helped. I don't think that was the only thing. I think a lot of things brought you through. Your training, your value systems, the way you were brought up, your pride in your outfit. A lot of things got you through. By the way, I don't feel that the war was the fact it's one of the greatest experiences you can have. I don't have any trauma. I don't have any nightmares. I don't have any. I mean, we almost were so instinctive, and so in terms of the terrain and the slightest sound of something, maybe that helped us. Some of us get through. You're always looking for the best place to be in case of shell fire or whatever, and any slightest noise of shell fire coming in, you move quickly and very almost instinctively, almost like an animal. Where am I going with this? We were.
Well, what got you through?
Oh well, and I think that was sort of the last end of it was just this very instinctive sort of animal-like. But obviously, your value system, your training, your religion, your all of those things combined help you get through. I think the whole military system of obeying orders helped you get through. I mean, you didn't countenance not doing what you were told to do. No, and as a private, one of the things I learned on this trip, which I hadn't thought about before, was the idea that the war for any individual soldier is, it's not hundreds of yards wide. It's just a very small area of where you're involved with what's in front of you, and you take that a piece at a time with your buddies. And you're young, and you this is your mission and you do it. And that's why I believe that even the young people today, we'd be surprised. We all tend to think, even in every culture, the grandmothers think the young people are going to hell in a handbasket, but it's not true. They're doing things differently, they may dress differently, but when they, at the end of the day, I think they're pretty solid.
Do you think that there's any lessons to be learned from the whole 10th Mountain experience that they can benefit from?
Well, to the extent that they can experience the story through reading or through video or through movies or whatever. Just knowing what other people did, I think, has to be helpful in how you might behave. As I said, your whole value system, how many stories did we hear about, you know, telling the truth, about being responsible, about, you know, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. And but the whole military system of the officers being sort of an elite separate group, and that's all done for a reason. It helps make people under very stressful situations do what they're supposed to do. I believe that. You know, the discipline of an outfit is very, very important. And I think we had a very, very strong discipline in the 10th. I don't know why. It could have been a number of things. Some people say, well, the average IQ might have been a little higher, or you were trained so hard, or you were together for so long, or whatever. I don't know, but we certainly had it. And you wouldn't countenance not, you know. So there's a machine gun up there, and you're supposed to go get it, help get rid of it. Or you do it. You just don't say, I'm not going to do that.
Did you feel at all like you were a glamorous ski troop?
No. Not in combat at all. I was proud of the outfit when I'm still proud of it. But in training, we had read a lot of things. I think we felt we were a little special in training. When you get into combat, that's all gone out the window. There's no glamour in combat. Just as there's no atheists in foxholes, there's no glamour in combat, period. The thing that I think is the most difficult thing to deal with is every day that you're in actual combat, not when you're in reserve, okay, but when you're in actual combat, you know that before you go out that day or that night on that mission, that all of you aren't coming back. You just know that. It's just part of the deal. It might not be a death. There's certainly going to be wounded. And you know that the longer you're there, the more likely you are. And so there's sort of this sort of constant sort of mental sort of strain, if you will, of, you know, you may be next. And, you know, when you hear shells come in and shrapnel flying and the noise and so on, it's not like life is a thin thread and you cut it with the sharpest razor blade and you know nothing happened, but you're in the midst of it and you hear all this whine of the shrapnel and the shells coming in and the planes flying by and then diving and dropping bombs and so on, and you have a sense of, well, if it's going to happen, you hope it's just a bullet just like that. But and all of us agree that we would be better to be just killed rather than to be really badly wounded. We all, at that time, talked about that we'd rather do that. Now, we would deal with it if we got wounded badly, like everyone else does, but we prefer that. And of course, everyone would like to have $1 million wound. You know, heard that expression. And one of our guys did get one like that, and he said, "Boy, I got it. See you." But that is I think somewhere you asked me what was the biggest difficulty or whatever. It was just that sort of knowing that strain of knowing that every day you went out with some of the guys, and of course you would talk about the guys that didn't make it or the guys that were hurt or killed or whatever, and but I did say that if you survive it, it's one of the greatest experiences you can ever have. What does it teach you? Well, it teaches you a tremendous amount of self-confidence. It teaches you, a lot of people said, you never know what Ray Farley is thinking when I was president of the company. You no matter what happened after the war, nothing was like being in combat. I mean, so I never got excited, no matter what was happening. And I learned that you should, if the leader can't be cool, if he's not cool, everybody else certainly isn't going to be cool. So I use that term not in a slangy way, but in terms of you have to keep your mind about you. And when you're running a big company, a lot of things go wrong. A fire in Nigeria in our plant, an explosion, people killed, and so on and so forth. A plant in Cuba seized by Castro. Argentina, the revolution there. Coup d'etats, huge inflation. You think about in Brazil, one year, the interest rate was 44 to 46% for the month. For the month. How do you run a business in that situation? You have to just hunker down and one foot in front of the other, and you keep everybody cool, calm, and collected, and you work your way through it. But the point being that as a result of combat, you can be in a very difficult situation, whether it's an automobile accident or whatever. You just don't get over. There's nothing that's like that, and it helped. It helped me in terms of everything else, and compared to that war, is terribly unimportant. And I use that phrase a lot now. And a gentleman in England taught it to me. But it fits. When you think about it, how many times have you had a run-in with one of your kids or your husband or whatever? When you think about it afterwards, it's terribly unimportant. What's important is the health of those kids and, all that sort of stuff. But I think the war, if you live through it, is one of the greatest experiences you can have. Would you just say, well, we ought to have wars for everybody to have that experience? No, I'm not saying that. But rather than, feel that, well, God, I'm not the same person, I'm depressed all the time that's not so. And I don't think for most people, most of those people on that trip were very normal, straightforward people, proud of what they had done and proud of the division, proud of everything. Probably helped them in their life somewhere along the line, in my view.
And my opinion of those people was that they were the most positive people I'd ever met. If you looked at them as a population. I thought they were some of the most enthusiastic people I've seen, that a lot of people that age have health problems that sort of weigh them down, and a lot of them, you didn't see that. And
Yeah.
a lot of great attitudes, I thought.
Yeah. Well, the one fellow, I can't remember his name, who I met the very first night I was there, he never had the opportunity to train with the 10th. He was a replacement. And he lasted maybe, as my best estimate, safe would be if he lasted 10 days, and he had a terrible, terrible wound. I mean, he lost his whole hand, he lost his eye, part of his face.
Was his name Hugh?
I
Or was it
think
Clark?
It was Hugh, I think. Hugh something.
Kit.
His wife had a little bit of Alzheimer's.
Yeah. Clark? Kit. Yeah, I did meet him. Was he missing something? Was he?
Oh, his left hand was,
Yeah.
he had a chest wound, he lost his eye and his face and so on. But he had never had a chance to train, yet he was so positive, following up on what you said. I mean, he was taking care of his wife, you know, who was a little bit, and he, even though he was a replacement, this was his first trip, like this was my first trip. He wanted to come back and see where he was wounded. That's what he wanted to say. That was his reason for coming.
Now, what was your reason for coming?
I wanted it wasn't to, first of all, I wouldn't have gone. I called Ed, I learned about the trip. I called Ed Bird and I said, Ed, if you go, I'll go. I didn't want to go alone because I knew that the chances of my meeting someone that I had been in service with were practically nil. Well, it was the case because no other people from Company C-87th were on the trip. But I wanted to go back up Belvedere and see where we went that night, and I wanted to see Torre Aiusi and because that stuck in my mind, and I wanted to see the Po, and I wanted to see Spiazzi up along the Lago di Garda. Spiazzi is inland. It wasn't along that lake. The 87th pulled a flanking operation and went up through the opposite side of the mountains from the lake.
And you went up to Spiazzi as well?
Yeah, and Ed and I and our company, the 87th went up there, and we took that village. We came in from behind, and I remember some incidents in there were very specific. That happened there. I wanted to see that. Well, number one, you couldn't exactly take the route we took up Belvedere, and Hill 813 is sitting off somewhere. We did see Casteldiano, of course. We drove through Torre Aiusi. I didn't have time to get out and look around or anything. There was a little tiny town called Pietraclora that we used, when we came off the line, we used to, at least our squad used to, maybe our whole company were in that area, but I remember sleeping in the lower part of this house, where the animals used to be, where they used to sleep, and straw and lice and all that kind of, but it was like the Taj Mahal for us coming off the line, you know. So, but anyway, I wanted to, my main reason was to kind of, because in my mind's eye, I remembered the train, but we fought up through there, and we never really went back there again. So I wanted to go back and see it. So we climbed Belvedere, but I could see, because the 87th, the 87th objective was the southwest flank of Belvedere, and the 85th was up the center, and the 86th took that mountain, that ridge to the right, and came up. I think we relieved the 85th a day or two later and moved to the peak, but our mission was the shoulder, and it had to have been sort of south and west. Well, we didn't get that far over because we climbed up the main front of Belvedere, if you remember. And but I think I could see and I think those fields are the same fields because they've been cultivated for years and years and years. 'Cause in my mind's eye, I could see nighttime. There was, in the beginning, it was very dark. Then there was some moon and some clouds, and there were, as a lead scout, there were sections of open field I had to go across. I think one of the things that saved us that night, and John Embry agreed with me, is that it was so cold, and the fact that we attacked at night, I think there were a whole lot less mines that were tripped. Because that whole area was mined. And we did have some people wounded and casualties with mines that night, but John Embry agrees that I think the thing that really helped is that ground was frozen and you couldn't compress the mine. Okay. And I think that saved us a lot of casualties that night. So I had this in my mind. I wanted to go back and see where we had fought. So it was kind of there were a few moments on top of Belvedere, quietly by myself. I thought I could go down the left flank as you looked up the mountain, the left flank, and see where my foxhole was. But I couldn't get there. It was just overgrown and trees. And when we were there, first of all, it was winter and there were no leaves on the trees. And a lot of that area they had tried to take it a few times and it had been hit with shells, and a lot of the stuff was blown out and blown up and so on. But now it's just overgrown so much, you know. But it was a kind of a private sort of moment that was really meaningful to me, to be up there and to think back at that time. Closure is not the proper word because there's nothing for me to close. It's just a tremendously exciting, difficult, traumatic, if you will, this and that experience, but I still think it was a great, great experience if you survived it. And Edbert and I were very lucky, and everybody that said that made it all the way through said, you know, when you think back, it was just luck of the draw, you know, because you didn't have control. I mean, so you sought out the best piece of terrain you could when artillery was coming in, but it was the luck of the draw whether artillery hit near you or on you or not, you know.
And the whole time that's going on, you're still trying to think how to go forward.
Absolutely.
Onward.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
you're trying to cover your behind, but still go.
Yeah. So the key thing I mentioned to everybody is that, and that one of the things that were drilled into us is you have to keep moving. You have to keep moving forward. And the time of my Bronze Star was I was a lead scout, and there were a lot of mines, and then there was artillery fire, and it was at night, and the main body of my squad apparently either lost contact or they froze in place. And I found myself out alone with no one following me. So I had to go back through the minefield. They say in the citation that I was probing my way through, and that's not true. It was nighttime and I was just fortunate not to step on mines or the ground was frozen, either one of the two. But when you think about it, was I going to keep going by myself? I mean, you don't think about it. It was automatic. I had to go back and get those guys. So I did. I went back and I brought them forward with me. But we were taught, keep moving forward, keep moving. And a lot of times, and we hated this, that the Germans would put up resistance, and at the last minute they'd give up. And they'd raise a white flag or whatever, particularly snipers. You know, you felt like you wanted to shoot them right on the spot, you know. I've heard of some stories like that, but by and large, we didn't just shoot prisoners. We took them as prisoners. My most interesting reaction, when I think about it afterwards, was in the fight for Toriaiusi, the town, the village that we were going through or something. And now I'm a sergeant, so I'm in the rear of the squad. And I came around this this corner, this rock sort of corner of a rock face. I don't recall whether there was a trail or not there, but it's not important. And there was a German soldier, and he had taken some shrapnel, just cut his stomach open, and his entrails were mostly intact, but and I'm sure he must have thought I was going to kill him. But my reaction was, he was no longer an enemy. And I gave him a drink of water. Just took my canteen and handed it to him. He handed it back to me and I took off. Now, what made me react that way, I don't know. But when I think about that, it's kind of profound. Here is another, he couldn't have been more than, you know, my age, 20, 21, 22, somebody's son. I'm thinking about this later, and at the time, I mean, all hell is breaking loose. And he's a wounded guy, you know, but he's not an enemy at that time. He's out of it. I mean, he's either going to die or, I'm pretty sure he did, but I'll never know. My reaction at the time was just to do that, you know. So war is kind of funny, you know. 1 minute, here's a guy that's going to kill you, and the next minute he's in deep, deep trouble, and I don't know. I've heard reactions of people that were fighting the Japanese that did a lot of things when we were in total control, but I have a hunch that's more in the minority, you know. Anyway.
Did acts of compassion like that sort of keep you whole mentally?
Never, you know, we didn't think about that. That was just a reaction I had, and I looked at it afterwards, and I was kind of pleased I did it. But you know, whether that kept me whole or not, I don't think we thought in those terms. But I think after the fact, I mean, what was that soldier thinking, that German guy thinking that at the time, you know? Anyway.
You could keep some shred of humanity in those, you know?
Pardon?
You could keep some shred of humanity.
Well, I suppose. Yeah.
I mean, that's remarkable, I think. Yeah. When you earned your Bronze Star, what were you thinking? Were you just thinking, I want to get through this? The actions that led up to, you weren't thinking, this will earn me some...
Oh, as I said, you don't think, well, I was actually surprised, as Ed was, that someone wrote that up, you know. But absolutely, you don't think I'm gonna go get the Bronze Star now, you know. You just don't think that way. I mean, you're just, it's survival. It's rough. I mean, things are happening, and you're doing what so almost instinctively. And there wasn't a thought in my mind that I wasn't going to go back and get those people. I mean, I just didn't think that way. And when you think about it, it was probably for my own survival. Am I going to keep going alone?
Did you realize what the dangers were of going back to get them?
Sure. I knew it, you know.
Did you realize how many mines there were?
No. I knew there were mines. We were told them. After the war, we were told how many mines were there. But according to John Embry, that whole area was mined. But I knew there were mines, yeah. But I didn't know how many. Our first sergeant, for example, not at that particular moment or that particular, he did step on a mine and fall on one, and he was killed. His name was Ursland. He was in the 87th originally. Ursland, that's a Norwegian descent person. But yeah, there were a lot of mines. A lot of people were hurt by mines, and the ones we hated the most were what they called bouncing Betsies. You tripped the wire and the mine bounced into the air so that it would hit you in the midsection as opposed to just blowing your leg off, which is a compression mine that you step on. You know. And of course, you know, for years afterwards, children would play and would step on this junk, you know. And so that whole thing to get rid of mines across the world is a good idea. You know. I'll bet you there's still mines buried all over the bloody place. You know.
When you were going through the whole battle experience, how did your attitude change? You know, when you got into it, you probably wondered, would you ever get into it? You know, because it took a long time in training. How did your attitude change over the course of battle?
Well, first of all, before the very first battle, we were all sort of, I shouldn't say we all, but I have a hunch we all were somewhat introspective the night before. Well, I guess we cleaned and oiled our guns over and over again. At the time, my first action, I had as a lead scout, I had a Thompson submachine gun, and they were 45 caliber bullets. They were pretty larger and bigger, not very accurate, but gave you a lot of firepower quickly, which you might have needed as a lead scout. Later on, we moved back to the M1s.
Can you pause for 1 second? Yeah. I want to switch tapes, because I hate to run out in the middle of a story.
Oh.
How heavy was your gun?
Well, the M1 was, I know,